Dr. Fania Davis has been a legal scholar and activist for decades. She has been active in the civil rights, anti-racial violence, anti-apartheid, black liberation, women's, prisoners, peace, socialist, and anti-imperialist movements, just to name a few. Her work has propelled her to ask this question: how do we heal from structural and interpersonal trauma? As a civil rights lawyer and social justice activist with a Ph.D. in indigenous knowledge, Dr. Davis has attempted to answer this very question by co-founding and directing the organization Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. Punitive school discipline and juvenile policies activates tragic cycles of violence, incarcerating wasted lives for youth of color. Founded in 2005, this organization works to interrupt cycles of violence and trauma by promoting institutional shifts towards restorative approaches that actively engage families, communities, and systems to repair harm and prevent further offending. Again, it's been an honor to put a year's work in with some amazing people. So without further ado, please welcome the divine Dr. Fania Davis.
That was a unique and beautiful and divine introduction, the likes of which I have never experienced before. So thank you so much, Angel. I am grateful and honored to be invited to the 9th Annual Association of Contemplative Mind and Higher Education C-Mind Conference to speak about restorative justice, contemplative practices, radical healing, and racial justice. And I love the conference theme, contemplative practices and its intersections with compassion and justice. Thank you, Angel, Michelle, Linda, the co-organizers, the co-chairs of the conference committee. Is Rhonda McGee here? No, okay, I want to thank her because I think it was Rhonda that connected me with you. And thank you to all of you who made this conference possible. But I don't understand how you're getting any work done here. I mean, since I've been here, all I want to do is walk outside and soak in the hot tub and get massages and sleep. I understand you've been doing a lot of work, so I want to honor you for that. And I want to honor you all in the audience for choosing to be here today and for choosing to do the work that you do in the world. I'm sure that many of you do what you do and are here today because you see and feel deep compassion for the pervasive harm and suffering in our world. Suffering on personal levels, on spirit levels, on family levels, community levels, ecological levels, harm caused by individuals, institutions, social structures, and by systems and histories and legacies of colonization, slavery, and genocide. Suffering caused by the 1% and by policymakers at the highest levels that perpetrate climate chaos, white supremacy, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, poverty, health, wealth, education, racial disparities, gun violence, Islamophobia, mass incarceration, crimmigration, disability discrimination, racial and police violence, and more. So much suffering. You see all this suffering and you're committed to reducing the suffering in the world. Whether you are a contemplative mind practitioner, an educator, or a social justice activist, or whether you stand at the intersections of some or all of these fields. Again, for your commitment, I give thanks. I also wish to honor the Ohlone people. When I came, I offered tobacco. These are the ancestors of this land, of this beautiful land, from the San Francisco Bay to Salinas Valley. In invoking their name, we affirm that we stand on an occupied land. We ask permission to walk upon it, and may we walk upon it in ways that honor them and their peacemaking and healing wisdom. In invoking the Ohlone, we also affirm our awareness that the king and Christian missionaries of Spain appropriated this land and committed genocide of its people with the blessing and legal authorization of the Vatican papal decrees of 1452 and 1493. We honor the Ohlone again with awareness. This is an occupied land. This is a post-genocidal land, and perhaps not post quite yet. Like the original harm of slavery, we have yet as a nation to tell the whole truth about this genocide. Do our schools teach the doctrine of discovery? Do we and our children know that it was these decrees from the Pope that launched and justified the horrific system of colonization, which dehumanized, diminished, debased, and destroyed, killed off native peoples, considered subhuman pagans by the Vatican and colonizers? We have yet to tell the whole truth about, take responsibility for, and make amends for this unspeakable genocide. Our nation tends to point the finger of blame at other nations that it accuses of genocide and pervasive human rights. But as an African proverb says, be careful of pointing, because 3 fingers are pointing back at you. We are a nation born in the blood of unspeakable terror and trauma of slavery and genocide. These are original wounds from which we have yet to heal. And because we have not healed, this original trauma perpetually reenacts itself, albeit in different guises. To paraphrase Brian Stevenson, slavery and genocide are not dead. They are only evolving. In this connection, I want to also acknowledge the people of Santa Cruz, because in 1994, they declared the second month in October Indigenous Peoples' Day. This act of decolonizing our history is an important step, albeit a first step, small step, but nonetheless an important step on the road to healing our original wounds. I'm going to take this off. I'm getting warm now. Actually, I started to get warm with that beautiful opening that Michelle did for us. In my elder years, I'm coming to realize the importance of embracing both the warrior and the healer in me. When hearing the word warrior, a lot of people say, but Fania, come on now, you're talking about war, you're talking about militarism. Warriors are aggressors. Warriors respond to harm with more harm. Many often associate the word warrior with harm. But when I use it in the mystical sense, perhaps you could say. I use it in its higher valence. Not warrior as a purveyor of harm, but warrior sage, wisdom warrior, spiritual warrior. Today, there is a growing realization that if we are to have a future, we must all become healers, all of us, every single one of us that walk this earth. This is our historical imperative. History is demanding that all of us learn to be present to ourselves, to our families, to our communities, to the earth in ways that bring about healing and wholeness rather than in ways that bring about discord, domination, devastation. We are experts at causing harm of all sorts. As I mentioned earlier, we must become skilled as healers. But equally important, we must walk in the world as brave ones who together stand up to and take on systemic, institutional, structural, and historical juggernauts of harm. It takes bravery and courage to do that. It takes fearlessness to do that. It is important that we not engage in a binary exercise of embracing the healer but rejecting the warrior, or vice versa. Embracing both, harmonizing what we often view as opposites or even oxymorons. Indeed, today in so many ways we are called upon to move beyond binary ways of thinking and knowing that split and fracture our world, but rather to embrace more holistic ways of knowing and being. And of course, it is indigenous knowledges and spiritualities that are beacons leading the way. Let me share with you the story of my own personal journey and how this coupling of warrior and healer looks in the context of my life and work. As an RJ, restorative justice practitioner, and as a social justice activist in Oakland schools, juvenile justice system, and in efforts to transform the legacies and aftermaths of slavery. I'll also explore the intersections of racial justice, restorative justice, and contemplative practices. I was born in the most segregated city of the South. You know what city that was? Dr. King called it the most segregated city. Guesses? What was that? Ah, that's close, but it's Birmingham. Yeah. We called it Birmingham because of the frequency of bombings attacking civil rights activists and churches. And believe it or not, I lived in a neighborhood called Dynamite Hill. That's my origin story. It was called Dynamite Hill because my family and other families moved into a previously all-white area, pushing the color line, and the Ku Klux Klan responded violently with terror, with racial terror, with bombs. We were fortunate our home was never struck, but homes all around us were. My father and other fathers organized an armed patrol to protect their families. Down the hill at my church, there lived a man by the name of attorney Arthur D. Shores, who worked with Thurgood Marshall in so much litigation, including going to the Supreme Court a number of times to bring down segregation in Alabama. His home was bombed 3 times. Fortunately, he and his family survived. Our church across the street was bombed because we had interracial meetings there. And then most of you know about the bombing I'm going to talk about now. September 15th, 1963, when 4 little girls perished at the 16th Street Baptist Church, 2 of which were very close friends of mine. One lived just a few doors down. The other was involved in social organizations with my family. Cynthia, Wesley, Carol, Robertson. So much that I do today is in honor of you. I left Birmingham not long, around the time of the bombing, to go away to school with a ferocious and irreversible commitment to be a warrior for justice. I became active in movements, and some of them were named in Angel's introduction. I moved to California to go to school and became active in solidarity with the Black Panthers. Police broke into our home and shot and almost killed my husband during that time. The bullet exited a millimeter from his spine. An all-points bulletin for my arrest as armed and dangerous was issued. A defense committee was formed and charges were dropped, with judges finding that the entry into our home was unconstitutional. It was largely because of the work that we were doing with the Black Panther Party in San Diego at that time. My sister, Angela Davis, was targeted. I led an international defense committee to free her. And then, inspired partially by the lawyers who defended my sister, I became a trial lawyer. Even as I walked in the world as an angry warrior, I was being called to meditation and yoga. In 1972, after my sister was acquitted, I was initiated into transcendental meditation. I began practicing yoga, but I was a closet practitioner. I was ridiculed by Marxist comrades when they discovered I was meditating and doing yoga. They even made me the butt of jokes and coined a name for me, Psychedelic Sally. Activist eschewed any notion that smacked of spirit and healing. As a racial and social justice activist and as a socialist, our credo was only matter is real, and to acknowledge spirit is to descend into superstition and metaphysics, violating dialectical materialism, a fundamental tenet of Marxism. After 30 years of cultivating the hyper-rational, hyper-masculinist, and hyper-aggressive qualities required to be a successful activist and trial lawyer, I fell out of balance. I literally became ill. I intuitively knew I was being invited to bring more feminine, healing, and spiritual energies into my life. Synchronicity and dreams led me to shut down my law practice, enter a Ph.D. program, and travel to Africa to apprentice with a Zulu traditional healer, the Honorable Vusa Mazulu Credo Mutua. When I returned from Africa, I couldn't get a job as a healer. I was very disappointed. So I ended up kicking and screaming, going back into the practice of law. But it was beautiful because my first client after I returned from Africa and initiation was an initiated man himself, a Nuba man from Northern Africa who had been denied tenure. And so I was able to talk to the jury about spiritual initiation, about African spirituality, and even talked about drumming and dancing. And then, after that trial, and after returning from Africa, I went to a conference and learned about this thing called restorative justice. Hearing about restorative justice was an epiphany and integrated the healer, the warrior in me. For the first time, I could embrace all of me. Restorative justice, do you know about restorative justice? Great. This justice is more concerned about getting well than getting even. It is more concerned about increasing social peace than deepening social conflict. It is more concerned about broken lives than about broken laws. It sees justice as a healing ground, not as a battleground. What is restorative justice? It is a worldview rooted in indigenous principles and a theory of justice that emphasizes bringing together everyone affected by wrongdoing to address their needs and responsibilities and to heal the harm as much as possible. To heal the harm as much as possible. It is a worldview rooted in indigenous principles and a theory of justice. Our prevailing justice system is based on a Roman notion of just deserts. If I do harm, the scales of justice become imbalanced, and the only way to rebalance is to do harm to me. Restorative justice invites a paradigm shift. The three questions retributive justice asks are: what rule was broken, who broke it, and what punishment is deserved? Three questions restorative justice asks are: who was harmed, what are the needs and responsibilities of everyone impacted, and how do all impacted come together to address needs and responsibilities and heal the harm? Restorative justice has indigenous origins, and the imperative to heal rather than respond to harm with more harm is what is central. Restorative justice has diverse applications. We use restorative justice in schools, in the justice system, in communities, and also to heal historical harm. How many of you have heard of restorative justice? Wow, amazing. Sorry?
Before coming here?
Yes, before coming here. Yeah. Great, wonderful. Does anyone want to take a pass at defining restorative justice? There's a hand in the back. No? You weren't holding up your hand?
I was.
Oh. Oh. Anyone want to hold up their hands for the purpose of answering that question? What is your understanding of what restorative justice is? Yeah.
To restore the community to balance.
Yes, after harm has been done, absolutely. Yeah. Normally, in retributive justice, we respond to harm with more harm. And restorative justice seeks to heal that harm rather than exacerbate that harm. Thank you. Thank you for that encouragement. I think I have the wrong wrong file up, but I'm just going to go ahead. I'm just going to, yeah. Okay, so restorative justice is a justice that seeks to respond to harm, not with more harm. It seeks to respond to harm with healing. Our justice system responds to harm with more harm, exacerbating harm, multiplying harm. Restorative justice seeks to break those cycles of harm. It is practiced in schools, in the justice system, and it is also practiced to heal historical harm. In our schools in Oakland, my organization, Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth, started a program in the schools, and after just a couple of years, we saw that suspension rates dropped 55%, from 7.4 to 3.3%. For Black suspension rates, which are always much higher, dropped from 14.1% to 7.3%, and for Latinos and Latinas, 5.4% to 2.3%. And basically, what we did instead of suspending and kicking out young people who caused harm in schools was to do circles, restorative justice circles, to address the harm and to heal the harm instead of exacerbating it. And these are the outcomes. Graduation rates after 3 years of doing restorative justice increased 60% in restorative justice schools versus 7% in non-restorative justice schools. Reading levels increased 128% in restorative justice schools versus 11% in non-restorative justice schools. Chronic absence rates decreased 24% in restorative justice schools versus 62% in non-restorative justice schools. The 4-year dropout rate decreased 56% in restorative justice schools versus 17% in non-restorative justice schools. So we have been successful in interrupting the racialized school to prison pipeline. Between 2012 and 2017, there was a 55% decline in suspensions, but disparities persist. The racialized school to prison pipeline, it refers to the fact that today, especially within the last 20 years, children are being criminalized. Young children, even as early as 5 years of age, who may have a temper tantrum, are taken out of the classroom in handcuffs by police. You know about the school to prison pipeline, yeah? Yeah. And all of normal adolescent behavior is criminalized. So we started using restorative justice instead of suspending and instead of expelling students. And this is really, it's starting to break the school to prison pipeline. Can we get up for a moment? I'm feeling like I need to just get a little more energy and, okay. So what we can do is maybe just shake a little bit. Hold your hands in the air, shake. Shake. Hold your hands out, shake, 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 shake. Shake, 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 shake. Shake, 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 shake. And shake your booty. One arm up, one arm down, shake it. Up and down. One arm up, shake it. You know what I want to do? I just want to have fun with you all. I want to, I want to connect, and I want to get questions and comments, and I want to just kind of toss this for now. Yeah? Is that okay?
Want me to move this?
Sure. I'm just feeling that, Mm-hmm. Okay, so why don't we just have a conversation? Anyone have any questions or comments? Yeah, over here. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Would you be willing to define how you are defining the word indigenous? Yep. Hold on.
Oh, sorry. Mm-hmm.
I was hoping you would be willing to define the word indigenous in the ways that you're using it.
In the ways that I use it, when I refer to indigenous, I'm speaking of cultures and ways of knowing and being that are pre-colonial, that are pre-capitalist, and that go back very far in time. Whether we're talking about the indigenous peoples of this country, Native American people, the indigenous peoples of Asia, of Africa. And indigenous peoples, they affirm their connection with all that is, with the earth, with the waters, with the plants, with the animals, with the stars. As opposed to living in bifurcated and fractured and broken worlds. They experience their connection with the cosmos, with the earth, with one another. And restorative justice is based on indigenous ways of doing justice, of repairing harm once harm has occurred. Anybody else want to talk about? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I'd like to hear a little bit about your journey from going from law training, which really emphasizes a retributive justice, as you talked about, and given the kind of early life experiences of injustice and incredible unfairness in our society, how you move from that to indigenous and restorative styles of justice, because that seems to be an incredibly key transition that has so much to do with the things we've been talking about here.
Well, I would say that after about 30 years of being a trial lawyer, fighting racism in the courts, about the same amount of time or longer being an activist, a fighter, a warrior in the more militaristic way. And after years of defending my sister who had been captured during a manhunt and arrested and stood trial for her life, but was freed because of a massive international movement. After my husband was almost killed and I was almost killed when the police entered our home. After seeing my friends be killed in Birmingham, Alabama, and my response being to join every possible movement there was in my day to fight against injustice, to fight against racism. After about 30 years of that anger, I felt out of balance and literally became ill. And I knew intuitively and from dreams and synchronicities that I was being invited to bring more healing and creative and more healing energies into my life, really. And through synchronicities, I was led to a Ph.D. program at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where I was able to travel to Africa and apprentice with a healer there by the name of Busamazulu Credo Mutwa, and was initiated as a healer. And then came back, and as I said, I couldn't find a job doing the healing work and had to go back to lawyering. But then I found out about restorative justice, which is a healing justice.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Oh, you got it. You on it. You are on it. Let me get a hug from you. No, this is good. This is good.
Good evening, Dr. Davis, and thank you for being here. So I want to ask you how restorative justice manifests kind of on the ground in a very kind of tangible way in the Oakland schools. What happened to produce such amazing transformations among the Oakland youth and the statistics that you just shared with us?
Very good question. What happened was that happened was that instead of kicking kids out, when they were disruptive, when they had a fight in the cafeteria, when they had a cell phone and wouldn't turn it off, instead of kicking them out of school, expelling them, we put them in circle. We brought them closer, Instead of pushing them away when they engaged in minor misbehavior, we brought them closer. We did a circle process with them. And the circle process involves just talking about what happened, what happened. And if you hurt somebody, what's going on with you, like say Tommy, who was cursing out a teacher. You could hear him all the way down the halls. The principal came, the security came, the restorative justice coordinator came. He was aggressively yelling at a teacher, and he wouldn't stop. The principal said, "We're going to call your mother." He says, "Go ahead, call my mother. I don't care about her." And then the restorative justice coordinator said, "Are you okay?" That question calmed him down. He was just railing at the teacher, railing at the principal, railing at the restorative justice coordinator, until the restorative justice coordinator said, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And that calmed him down. That sort of took him out of his back brain. And then the restorative justice coordinator took him to the restorative justice peacemaking room and had a conversation, and learned that the young man's mother had been missing for the last 2 nights, that he was actually taking care of his younger siblings and getting them off, dressing them, feeding them, and getting them off to school. And when he was in the classroom, he had his head on the desk. And when the teacher yelled at him 3 times to sit up straight, the third he didn't respond the first 2 times. The third time, he just jumped up and got in her face and started yelling at her. And the teacher, because she had been actually assaulted by a youth the year before, was afraid the same thing was going to happen. And none of this came out until the Restorative Justice coordinator talked to him. The principal wanted to just suspend him simply because he had violated the rule against being disrespectful to teachers. And that's the zero tolerance policy that applies in non-restorative justice. If you violate the rule, then you're going to be punished for it. The principal wanted to punish him because he violated that rule, but the Restorative Justice coordinator said, can I try something else? Can I try something else? And he did, and he got the story out. If he had just expelled the student or suspended the student, we never would have known the truth. Not only that, if that student had been suspended, he would have been much more likely to have been incarcerated, right? And so keeping kids in school is a good way, is the best way to break the school-to-prison pipeline. Yeah. And to interrupt policies of mass incarceration. So what happened with this young man was that there was a circle. Instead of punishing him, they used the circle process. And the teacher came, the mother was found, she came, and the principal was there, and the young man was there. And the teacher told her story about how she had been assaulted the year before. She thought the same thing was going to happen again, and that's why she got very angry at him. Of course, he responded negatively when she was responding so intensely. And the teacher apologized and said next time she would be more discreet and maybe take the child out instead of fronting at him and yelling at him in the classroom in front of all of the students. The boy apologized and explained his story and offered to help her for the next 2 weeks with chores to make it right. The mother said that she apologized and she took responsibility for the whole thing and recommitted herself to going back to drug rehabilitation counseling. And the young man did well after that and went on to graduate. But that's an example of how the circle process works. Yeah. Instead of pushing the kid away when wrongdoing happens, you bring the child in closer. Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm curious. I know one of the other groups that experiences disproportionate levels of incarceration are people who experience mental illness. And I'm curious if your work is in any way doing restorative justice work with young people or other community members who are struggling with mental health and potentially at risk to be incarcerated at disproportionate numbers.
You know, restorative justice is not a panacea. It has amazing results and impacts and findings, but it's not a panacea. And if a child needs some more specialized intervention for mental illness, then we need to refer that child to a physician or a healer of some sort. But typically, problems that are caused by mental illness are not suitable for restorative justice processes. More specialized intervention is needed.
Restorative justice, though, helps mental health related as opposed to retributive justice. I don't know.
If it what? Say that again.
I'm wondering if restorative justice helps surface that mental health issues are at play more so than a retributive justice model, or if you've had any experience with that.
I think sometimes youth who are stereotyped, as having some sort of mental illness, or aggression, just extraordinary aggression, or withdrawal. When they're mistakenly diagnosed in that way, when they participate in these circle processes, it becomes clear that they just need some loving. They need, to be seen and heard. But I can't think of any examples right now where youth that we thought had mental issues were able to find the specialized intervention that they needed in the circle process. Basically, what happens in circles is that you embrace one another. You feel a sense of oneness, a sense of belonging. Everybody's voice matters in the circle. We use a talking piece, and the talking piece is circulated from person to person. And only the person holding the talking piece can speak from the heart and with respect. Everyone else listens with respect and from the heart. It's amazing because sometimes youth who are 14 years old and in the 9th grade sit in a circle with the mayor, when we've had these kinds of circles, or with the police chief, and they can feel that their voice, at least in that circle process, matters just as much because that process promotes that, and that talking piece is an equalizer in that way. And sometimes youth who never speak, speak and feel really, at the end of the circle, they'll say, that was a really, good circle. And they clearly find their voice in spaces. When people really want to listen to you, your truth comes out and your wisdom just sort of effortlessly flows out of you. And that's what happens in these circles. Youth who ordinarily don't speak very much feel that they are being invited, that the space is open, and they feel safe enough to speak. And then we have ceremony, too. We usually open with some sort of ceremony. And it can be like a movement process that Michelle just did, or it can be silence, or it can be, depending on the participants, a prayer. The whole point is to mark the space as a special one that we are about to enter, where you will be heard and you will have voice. And we will be present to one another and connected to one another in ways that we don't ordinarily feel connected. And so ceremony, and the ceremony can be almost anything, as I said earlier, that marks the space as a special and sacred one. And we have a ceremony, too, that ends the circle process. It's sort of bookended. And we have a centerpiece. The centerpiece reminds us that there are no sides when conflict happens. There's only one focus and one center, and that is to find some healing. So the centerpiece, you might call it an altar if you look at it. We usually use African cloth, and there are the elements: air, water, fire, earth. And, if it's a circle of black boys, black young men, there might be pictures of young black men who have been lost, to gun violence. Whatever the circle is about, you're going to find things in the center of the circle that reflect that. And you also start the circle, you start with ceremony, and then you do some trust-building exercises. And then you set a foundation of your values. How are we going to be present to one another today? What do I need to feel safe in this circle? What do I need to be able to speak freely? Well, it may be that I need non-judgment. I need people to suspend judgment. It may be that I need honesty. It may be that I need everyone to see the best in all of us. So we create a foundation of values to do these circles. And we also make decisions by consensus, which means that there's not a majority rule. Everybody agrees. You may not 100% agree, but if you can live with it. So, yeah, this is the circle process, which is a main process that has been used in lieu of kicking kids out, suspending kids, and expelling kids. We use these circle processes, which children and young people really take to, like fish to water. And that's why we see the incredible outcomes that we've seen by using the circle process.
Thank you
You're
for being
welcome.
here and speaking to indigenous truths and multiplicity.
Thank you.
I'm Sydney Varai. I've spoke some truth of my own indigeneity origins, being of the Ilocano people of the Philippines and settling here in the United States. One of the tensions that I feel with some of the restorative justice practices is that there's an irony. Because so many of our brothers and sisters in indigenous communities have felt abandoned by others who've experienced the multiple ways that colonization has maintained its truth with other people of color in our communities. And I'm just wondering if you might be able to help me enliven that irony with some sense of humor. With it, because I'm struggling. I struggle with that truth that there's an abandonment when we're engaging practices of restorative justice, but there's no elder of the lands that these practices are engaged with, or these dead bodies are being shot and left. There's no invitation of bringing some who might have a better sense of connecting the bodies that we're losing in our communities with the lands that have been also shot up in many ways. So I'm
That have
wondering
also been what?
shot up.
I feel like I want to get closer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm just looking for some. How do we hold that real truth? I'm seeing this and I'm thinking, and now I have to go get certified in restorative justice practices, as and I've shared with some of my fellow friends here that there's other ways that I've experienced that, and what people I guess are calling that, but we don't use that language. There's a humor in there for me of like.
No, I really hear you. So restorative justice isn't always practiced in honorable ways. It's not always practiced in ways that honor its indigenous roots. In some cases, it's, it's just kind of commercialized. What's the word? It has no heart. It can be practiced in ways that are without heart, without spirit, that are very mechanical, and that are not, that just don't really honor the beautiful indigenous roots. It can be very, very, very frustrating, I'm sure, especially for persons, and I've seen it, who do have indigenous origins. And, the restorative justice movement actually, in its first 35 years, was mostly white. Yep. And when I found out about restorative justice and discovered that there was nothing written about race and restorative justice and no real embracing of its indigenous roots, I knew that I had my work cut out for me. Yeah. And from that moment, I became really invested in and committed to changing that. And my comrades and colleagues in Oakland were also very involved in the transformation of the restorative justice movement. The first conference I went to was, I think, 2011. And I went there, and I hardly saw any people of color. There were no speeches, either plenary or breakouts, that addressed race or the indigenous roots of restorative justice. And I got together with the few people of color who were there, and I said, we've got to change this. And we did. The next conference was in Toledo, Ohio. And the conference theme was Keeping It Real, Race and Restorative Justice. And I invited my sister, who knows diddly squat about restorative justice, nothing, Angela Davis, right, to speak. I also invited a former Panther, Erica Huggins, yeah, you know, who's an amazing practitioner both of spirituality and social justice, and an early one. Before it was, now it's more common. It used to be that you were either a social justice warrior, activist, you know, or a meditator, healer. Yeah. Because I remember when I was meditating, my Marxist comrades would call me Psychedelic Sally and just, and imply, they'd make me the butt of jokes and ridicule. Because to them, spirituality, it was inconsistent with Marxism and dialectical materialism. Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so, yeah. What? Oh, that's right, Toledo. Thank you. I was trying to get back to my train of thought. So we had this conference in Toledo, and Angela spoke, Erica Huggins spoke, Tim Wise, you know Tim Wise, right? Yeah. And that was sort of the turning point for the restorative justice movement. After that, we had a conference, every 2 years we have conferences, we had a conference in Florida, and more people of color were there. There were more speeches and presentations and panels on race and indigenous roots of restorative justice. And then the most recent conference was held in Oakland, California. Yay, right? So that was amazing. We had 1,500 people there from all over the world. And this conference addressed race and marginalized populations and suppressed and subordinated groups of all manner. That was the focus of the conference. And it was, we had probably about 50% people of color there. And it is sort of a peak in this whole effort to transform and colorize, if you will, the restorative justice movement. So I don't know where you are. Where are you? You talked about needing to get certified to practice restorative.
It's going to these conferences, spending all this amount of money to sit and listen and, again, be told that, you know, there are some truths that I can specifically call on stories where we engage in these types of practices that are, and I mentioned this last night, being sort of colonized in yet another way. It's sort of a sophisticated colonization that's still perpetuating the erasure, absence, disappearance, and I'm using this word abandonment primarily from some theologians who've also acknowledged that. Ruby Sales comes to mind about our relationship to our our youth. And as a new ancestor to my community, I have to explain my position to them about where I sit with these things that show up. And so, you know, how do I carry these truths knowing that my counterparts don't even understand that tension that lives within? And so I'm constantly looking for humor, you know, in the irony of the multiplicities of our truths. So I just didn't know if you had found any.
Nothing humorous comes to mind. Anybody have anything humorous right now? But please, I just want to encourage you to stay on this path because you have beautiful indigenous traditions of your peoples. Bring them into the circle, bring them into the work. And you don't need anybody's permission to do that. And I just want to honor you and honor your people and honor your traditions. And thank you.
I wanted to ask, I'm back here.
Where are you? Oh.
Right here. Hi. So a year ago, last July, my community suffered an intense trauma of a black man in our community being literally left in pieces by an officer named Taylor Radford, who shot this man unprovoked and left him in the streets for an entire community and children to be traumatized by that. And I worked with his family around creating a campaign, and this, I just want to say his name, because his name was Jerry Lejai Williams. And I wanted to ask what restorative justice looks like when the perpetrator of the violence is unilaterally backed by the police department and the structures and the city and the district attorney and all of the system behind him. And we also saw the best of our organizing community and also the worst. We had a lot of pain in our community as a result, and I just wanted to ask for advice on how we can, our movements can show up for each other in desperate and traumatic times like that.
When the person causing harm does not take responsibility for that harm, restorative processes are not appropriate. Because we would never bring into a circle someone who's been harmed once, only to sit across the person who harmed them, will harm them again. So restorative justice isn't always appropriate or possible. And in this kind of case, organizing in the community, having healing circles within the community, it's not always possible to have that encounter with the person who is directly responsible for causing the harm. But it's possible sometimes to bring in surrogates if the person who caused the harm is not taking responsibility, then maybe another police officer will come in, you know, to stand in. It would take a very brave police officer to do that. But we do have situations where if one party isn't taking responsibility or does not agree to come into the circle, then we will use surrogates. But I can see healing circles happening in the community and with the family. Not necessarily encounter circles with the person causing harm. And if you do have encounter circles with a surrogate instead of the person who caused the harm. I'm very sorry to hear about. What community was that?
This was Asheville, North Carolina.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, and they released the records.
Thank you. So they ended up ruling that there was a state law that precluded the district attorney from being able to file charges against the police officer. And so we supported the family through the process of hearing that news, including actually really encouraging the family to go through those steps. They were so traumatized and so hurt, they didn't want to go anywhere near a courthouse.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of just kind of in the trenches, direct service, just bringing them meals, a lot of love, a lot of healing, you know, spiritual support, right?
Good.
And then once that was clear, We did a press event. We unveiled the pictures of Jerry's body, which was literally his arm was blown off. And the mother really wanted to show that photo.
Yeah, like Emmett Till's mother.
Yeah, and there were people who were against that, and we just went with what the mother's desires, and it was incredibly powerful. She cried deep public lament at these pictures of this, you know, her son in pieces on the ground. And then a year, you know, we had the year anniversary in July, and so the community rallied around the family again to direct, you know, anniversary events and a press event. And but to be honest, our organizing community has been racked with, you know, just the pain and the trauma and just re-stimulated trauma. And some, you know, divisiveness in the community around it. So it's something that really rocked our community, and I don't know that without some kind of restorative process that our community, our organizing community, will ever be whole.
Well, you can start circles. You may not have everybody involved, all of the major parties involved, but even if it's a circle of only 6 or 7, you can start these healing circles. And it may be that others will come in. But just coming together to mourn, to express anger, rage, and to talk about how we heal. A circle is a process that can hold all of those emotions when properly facilitated. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Can't believe it's. Okay.
I just wanted to bring up one thought on this when I hear about the gaps between the way things work, is that I've been working a lot lately with NVC. And I think in situations where there's so much enemy imagery, that nonviolent communication methods would be a way to start there, with acknowledging enemy images and beginning to work on the empathy and the stuff we've been talking about today, about seeing each other as human beings who are just doing tragic things to get our needs met. And the tragedy of that we don't have any more skillful way or more compassionate way to get where we want to be. And I think that would be a piece of a lot of the healing.
Yes, and creating circle spaces, creating these safe containers where we agree upon values, and that becomes a foundation for how we're together. And creating spaces where we are present to one another in ways that bring healing, and are consciously and intentionally present in that way, and work hard to be present in that way is what is needed. And creating these sort of liberated spaces of circles where we work to heal rather than harm is something that is encouraging to me. And I see these circles happening. They're spreading. They're certainly doing that in Oakland. Oakland is our schools. I think almost 60% of our schools now have restorative justice programming. And our justice system is also adopting restorative justice. And we're working now to create an entire restorative city in Oakland. Yeah, thank you. I understand that's the last part. Time has gone so fast. I'm sorry, I had to scrap my presentation. I had a long presentation, but I didn't feel like that was what was needed. And I could talk to you even more, but we can't, obviously, because it's 8:30, and I've got to get my massage, too. Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being the healers that you are, because, as I said earlier, history is calling upon us to be healers. And also to stand against injustice and the massive harms that are happening daily around us. So I just want to honor you, and may the way be open for you to be successful in your work as healers, and as your work as perhaps warriors as well. Thank you.